Welcome to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. I'm your host, Dan Baptiste, and together we'll explore what it takes to excel in brand marketing at one of the most exciting and disruptive times in industry history. Welcome to Content Disrupted. As we know, the world is moving incredibly fast, but I think we've done it. We've finally found someone who is actually keeping up and maybe even moving faster. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Stefan Weitz. Stefan has spent his career driving meaningful innovation through technology and is about to launch the single most important AI strategy event to date, HumanX. On today's episode, we'll talk to Stefan about the state of the state, specific ways AI is challenging conventional approaches to marketing and business, and how we as leaders have bad behavior. We're misusing Gen AI and other tools, which can be catastrophic if we don't change mindset and behavior and do it pretty quickly. Sounds like we need you. Stefan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm not quite sure I'm the savior, but I certainly have some opinions. Often wrong, never in doubt. So, let's go with that.
Sounds good. Well, before we dig into those, it'd be great if you can give a bit of your background. I think it's, you've had a really interesting journey that's helped you have some of these strong opinions on where we go from here. So it'd be great to kind of capture this.
I had been a nerd since I was a child, since I was 8 years old, writing code since I was a kid. I had my first Apple IIe way back when. I've been building robots since then. You name it, I probably built it. I had a lot of friends, you can imagine. But really, I got that took me into Microsoft at a pretty young age and was there for many years and built a bunch of the products that people know and sometimes love. I did not do Teams, in case anyone was curious. I'm just kidding.
It's not your fault. Yeah.
No, it's fine. And then I went from there to private equity and built a bunch of companies inside of PE shops and ran some logistics operations, all of which really required AI pre-AI. So, I built a lot of it or helped build some of it back in the day at Microsoft and had to figure out how to use it in these enterprises that I was running or starting. And that disconnect, even back then when it wasn't technically considered AI, it's more machine learning at that point, that disconnect was pretty significant. So that's why I was so passionate when it was time to start or time to do something new. Finally, we have an AI technology which looks and smells more like what people think AI actually is. And so, of course, got people very excited. But the struggle we saw was that leaders just didn't know what to do with this Promethean gift. And so they were stoked about it. And they were like, great, now I'm going to run and do a bunch of stuff. And then bad things happened. And then they were kind of recalcitrant to go and actually do something again. So really, that was the impetus for HumanX, was how do we create a place where you have the world's best AI thinkers, the biggest companies in the world, even small companies, come together and figure out their journey down this AI path, which is really the point of it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I think as we see this gap that continues to widen, it's really mindset and behavior. And to your point, like people that like shot out the gate and then maybe didn't materialize in the way they thought, and then they like retracted and they're like, oh, it's not what we think it is, run away. But it seems like that isn't the right play, if I hear you right.
Well, yeah, at the end of the day, we know AI is advancing at this crazy pace. Honestly, I've been in tech for almost 30 years now. My God. Is that right? Yeah, it is. Oh my God. Longer than that if you count when I was 8. And we've seen things come. We've seen the internet come. We've seen mobile phones come, mobile networks come, 3G, 4G come. But if you look at those adoption curves, they were steep, but they were nothing like we've seen with artificial intelligence. And forget even the adoption, just the pace of innovation that's happening globally on a single topic is different than I think we've seen before. So yeah, at the end of the day, the reality is an organization shouldn't be faulted for not keeping up. I don't know how you would, because there are 400 newsletters out there at this point, half of which are written by AIs. And they're just link balls to other people's better journalism in most cases. And unless you're in a 24/7 like I am, I can't keep up. And I'm not running another company that is not about AI. So that was the insight that we had, which is really, after talking to 120 global leaders, 3/4 of them said that AI is a key differentiator for their business, but only 15% said they were confident they were investing in the right area. So they had no practical roadmap. They were spraying and praying based on some cool demos or something they read in Reddit. And that's what was happening 2 years ago.
Yeah. So fast forward to today. You talk about the adoption curve and how quickly it's being adopted, but it's also seemingly adopted ineffectively or at a really shallow case. Can you talk about that disconnect? Is it and is that problematic I assume the answer is yes, but
It is, but maybe not for the reason you think. You kind of mentioned it earlier, but I would say yes. But the companies that tend to do it well, that we've seen at least do it well, we've talked to a lot of companies, they're the ones that are not approaching it from a technology first orientation. So just like any other investment you make, whether it's capital expense or a new building or hiring new workers, whatever it might be, you don't start with the premise that humans are good, I should hire more humans, or buildings are good, I should buy more buildings. That's not what you do as a business leader. You shouldn't. Maybe you do. You shouldn't. Pro tip, don't do that. And the challenge with AI is that's been the approach. It's like, oh my gosh, we have these cool new tools I saw. We should go do AI in the organization rather than saying, timeout, absent technology. What are the things that cause our business to grow and be more successful? Increase revenue, more customers, higher basket from each customer, to reduce our costs. Like, what are the things? What are your methods and mechanisms of operation? And what are the levers you can pull to drive your business forward or your organization forward if you're a nonprofit? And start there. That's the first thing, which again, it sounds so obvious. That's just standard kind of business 101. But we have let, unfortunately, the shiny bauble that is AI, which it is an awesome bauble, don't get me wrong. But we've let that kind of blind us to this core that most business leaders should understand, which is start with the problem, not the solution, then see what can actually solve that problem for you, which may be AI. So that's where we're seeing companies do well. To your point, companies that just do it on a kind of a very peremptory or surface level, it is more of that. It's kind of like, I saw this cool demo. I can make kick-ass videos with AI. I'm going to bring it in. I'm going to get a site license for my organization. I'm going to pay 10 grand a month for this thing. And then they're like, well, and we don't really create many videos. What did we just do? That's where we're seeing a lot of that. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's really interesting as you think about this future that we're trying to create and architect together. A lot of it is creative problem solving and behavior change. And as you're looking at it, not only is it what are we trying to do, but how do we do it and how do we do it differently? And I think there's this universe of folks where they're using AI to maybe do something they've been conventionally doing, like faster or cheaper. Maybe we can fire some people. And the growth mindset, when you say, let me take a step back and say, could I fundamentally rethink how I do this and how I go to market and how I connect with people? That requires a different level of strategy. It's not just like, hey, can this thing replace this other thing and do it cheaper? It's how do I reimagine how to go to market? And you do agree with that? And do you see that popping up in some of the research you've done and the conversations you're having?
Yeah, I think, and you use a phrase which I love, and I don't think it was even necessarily intentional, but the growth mindset. Carol Dweck did a great book on this 20 years, 15 years ago now, which really talked about that. Forget growth as in I'm growing my company. It's how do you grow as a human being? And so much of that was actually being able to say three simple words that most business leaders are just terrified to say, which are, I don't know. And that's the first step to actually learning, is admitting you don't know something. And that's what we're seeing again in this research we did, which is fascinating. We did the largest study of AI in the enterprise with Harris, the big polling company. There's all the political polls and everything else. So great partners of ours. We created this study, went out to market with it. And one of the first questions was basically rate your proficiency with artificial intelligence technologies generally. Then we asked a bunch of questions on specific things like RAG and fine tuning and edge compute and all kind of stuff. And the numbers came back after over 1,000 companies responded. And it was like a 90% top box on proficiency with AI among executives. And I'm like, well, that's just bullshit. So I said, guys, did you invert the numbers? Like, is it? I would believe 10%. I would believe 10%. I think business leaders probably are relatively, especially in technology, skilled. What that showed me, and what was really scary, was that you have it's kind of like the Parker principle, whatever the one is, where you rise to the level of your incompetence. I can't think what that is, but basically, they are 90% of leaders are too chicken shit to say, I don't know what's going on. Instead, I'll just fake it. And of course, you can imagine what's going to happen. So back to your point of the growth mindset and how do you think about it differently, you have to be okay and willing to say, I don't really know what this is going to do for us. Let me go ahead and ask those inquisitive questions like a 6-year-old. Ask the why, so you get down to the very root of the problem you're trying to solve, and then go find the solution. But too often we're seeing the embarrassment, ego, lack of humility causing problems. So yeah, it's a huge problem.
What's kind of curious about that too is these business leaders are in a position to really embrace a strategic approach with AI because they've been solving business problems for their entire lives, right? So if you can take a step back and say, man, I know the problem, right? How can I be curious about the solution instead of I have AI proficiency and all of those things? So the lack, the sort of ego or the overconfidence, to your point, is going to hold you back. And it also, like, your employees are going to call bullshit on that too. If they're looking and saying like, hey, none of this is real. Like, I'm using this in my personal life. And, what we're projecting is slow, clunky, and ineffective compared to what I'm hearing come out of your mouth as a business strategy. So it's an interesting dilemma. And, as you look at that dynamic, was that the thing that jumped out at you through the research, or were there any other surprising things that maybe caught you off guard in the research?
Well, one of the other interesting ones, which should bode well for maybe some of your customers and partners as well, is that the big large incumbents. I know you have customers of all sizes, but the big large incumbents view AI as more of a threat to them than the smaller companies. So smaller companies, which I guess isn't super surprising, except that you think of the larger incumbents have more resources to deploy. So you would think to a certain extent they could go do some cool stuff. But really, if you look at the confidence of when you ask the question around, I forget the exact wording, but basically, how confident are you in your future strategy or your competitive strategy long term? And the numbers were definitely flipped as far as small, scrappy, or smaller companies versus the large ones. That was interesting. And then last thing I'll just say on the research, which was again goes I think to my earlier point, was that what people say they think AI will do for them when they start out their strategies and start out their pilot projects, which is generally, driving more efficiency, cutting costs, increasing revenue, all these things, very kind of grandiose things. So we had them rank all their goals as to which ones you said you would achieve. And then we said, which ones have you actually achieved with your pilots? And those three I mentioned, they're better worded than that, but they were about halfway down the list. And the thing that was consistently coming up as what was actually efficacious was better customer service, because that is unquestionable in most cases that an AI bot trained correctly can outperform a human call center employee in many situations. And so that was an interesting disconnect too, where it's like everyone believed the hype, this is going to create these incredible agents, or it's going to create these incredible new growth opportunities for you, which absolutely will come true. I'm not saying it's hype forever, but probably hype a year and a half ago. Everyone bought into that. And instead, the smart ones said, again, go back to your first principles. What's driving our costs? Oh, customer service calls are an average of 42 minutes a piece. How do we drive that down? Can we do it away without a crappy call tree, or can we do it without the old school bots on your site? Those are the ones that actually got most benefit out of it. So that was interesting as well, to think of kind of what they expected versus what they got.
When you look, if I hop back to your point about these sort of large incumbents and their lack of AI adoption or view as a threat, part of it is the speed of adoption, I would assume, right? Because now if you're, a large enterprise organization actually using AI at scale, and we all know the hoops you have to jump through. We work with many regulated industries, and doing like a very safe, like super simple deployment of AI, it takes a year, which is almost laughable, because you're like, oh my God, like this world looks, yeah, it looks different in a week, never mind a year later, right? So like, how do you reconcile that? Like, are you consulting leaders around this paradigm? Because if you take a step back and you play that out, I don't know, and you've been in tech your whole life and nerded out way harder than I have, but I don't know that I've ever seen a moment where this cycles of innovation are so fast and the adoption rate is so guarded. So like this gap just keeps getting wider and wider and wider and wider. And then it's like, to your point of them viewing it as a risk, they should, because like, what are we going to have, like tar pits of like dead enterprise companies because they couldn't keep up? Like, where does this go?
Oh, that's a great. If I had that answer, I probably would be day trading more than I am now. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so I guess when I've talked to leaders about this, right now, the guidance I'm giving is given the pace of and the rapidity of innovation in the space, is to get back to your agile roots. I mean, I'm a waterfall guy. That's what I did my entire life, right? I was a waterfall developer type thing. And then agile came along. I'm like, oh, that's actually somewhat better in some cases, not all cases. And I think what we see again is there's a tendency to look at AI as this behemoth and say we can go fundamentally rethink our sales strategy using AI, right? And so you take off. It's like you really go after the elephant. And of course, the right saying is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, which Objectively is a weird saying. But that's I'm not
I
sure
think
why I
you
keep
get
using like
canceled
that.
these days if you
I'm
eat
probably
elephants, but
so. I mean,
yeah.
please do not eat elephants.
Yeah.
There we go. It's like my PSA. Put that top of the hour.
Yep.
So that's what I think we're seeing success is companies who are letting either centers of excellences, which have good and bad parts to them, or PMOs, which God forbid, but it has to happen sometimes. Actually corralling all the stakeholders around the table, having those conversations around what's actually going to be useful for us to drive the business forward, and then starting with those smaller, chunky things. Because to your point, if you have a big company changing initiative and you pick a horse and that horse is running and you're so stoked, and then literally, as we know, 3 months later a new sexier colt comes out, and laps the horse. You're like, well, now what do we do? Start from scratch, keep going, hope it works. Whereas if you're doing those smaller point solutions towards a larger whole, I wouldn't say just do 20 random point solutions, but certainly say if you're doing CS, what are the 4 smaller projects you can actually do? Is it getting a better knowledge base internally? Is it putting a better chatbot? Is it handling IVRs in a more effective way? Whatever it might be, those smaller things, get those in place, and measure the impact, and then you can have a little more confidence in pursuing the larger goals. You still run the risk of betting on the wrong horse, but at least you're kind of minimizing by chunking some of the projects. That's what we've seen a couple companies do pretty well.
Yeah, I also think when we look at who owns and drives initiatives, it's interesting, right? Because some companies are like, oh, it's AI that should live with our IT or tech department. But what we're saying here is it's strategy and behavior, right? So, the disconnect there is like you have a broad solution that maybe doesn't, deliver on these specific agile problems or reimagining. So kind of shrinking it, making sure you're focused on the outcome and how do we change behavior and how do we reimagine or how do we get stronger in these areas, and kind of start with a focused area and then move horizontally until we're really cooking in a different way of work, rather than, to your point, how do we buy more AI and have
Exactly.
90%
Get my
proficiency that
budget. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
which is interesting. And are you seeing adoption or ownership having success, like being led by certain functional areas of the business? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, not to, I hate to say this as a tech nerd, but I would say the ones we see, I'll flip it, tend to fail most are those that are technically driven. Unless it's a very technical thing. Like if you're looking at, looking reducing your attack profile, from external threats, or if it's a super cyber thing or something related to networking and storage, like there's things that make sense and that tech has to drive. But it's when tech, and again, my brothers and sisters, I'm sorry, but it's when tech kind of get over their skis and start to think, well, gosh, I could do this thing that would actually solve our revenue problem through increasing our average basket size or getting our NRR up. That's when we see problems. So I can see that. And what's worked, again, it's I hate to say it because again, it's also one of those you kind of roll your eyes in a big company thing, but you have to bring in cross-functional stakeholders because these things it's unlike discrete systems. I mean, it's kind of like an ERP in the old days. We deploy an ERP and you have every division in the company has to be involved, from operations to finance to development, everything. It's kind of like that, but it's ERPs would take 2 years to put in place. In the old days of SAP and ABAP, we don't have 2 years anymore. But you have to think of it that way. You have to really think of it as, even if it's a discrete function, there are likely impacts that will happen that either will impact the efficacy of the solution you put in place, or more optimistically, that other departments could benefit from. So if you can distill better data, how is it useful for sales? If you can uncover customer insights, how is it useful for marketing? It might be useful for your particular function around support, but maybe it's actually useful as well for sales. So having those cross team kind of working groups, we do see as unfortunately a best practice.
yeah. I mean, you did say something interesting, even in the ownership conversation. There are certain things tech needs to own, like if it's a cybersecurity function, but that gets back to tech. That's tech's problem, right? Like they're the business owner of cybersecurity and protecting the business from threats, right? So, starting to think of having the business stakeholder using technology to effectively solve problems front and center, versus broadly adopting some sort of AI deployment and rolling it out and crossing your fingers and then watching it crash and burn like in front of you.
Or most likely, actually, it's not, a lot of them we see don't crash and burn. They just failed to deliver anything. It's like I just spent $1.2 million this year on this pilot, and we're not any better than we were a year ago. It's like, shh, let's AI. So like you can see crash and burns. I mean, and you don't blame them. Was it last year? I think it was last year. There was one of the activist shareholders. I can't remember. Maybe an Elliot. But somebody out there was basically making noises about suing Disney for breach of fiduciary responsibility because they didn't at the time have an AI strategy published for the company. And they said everyone else who has published one has seen whatever, a 10% gain in share price. By you not doing this, Disney, you are fundamentally betraying your shareholders. And I don't think it ever went anywhere, but it's an interesting kind of like, holy smokes, like that's where we're at now. So you can see why companies kind of go down the path.
Yeah. And as you look at this world, like one of the things we've been focused on as a company, we're in the content marketing space. Tools are tools, right? Like you can come in and you can have a tool that you can plug into a team. And to your point, like a year later, like, is this really happening or changing? So one of the things we look at as our core responsibility is how do we understand that like from to, and how do we bring your teams from the quote unquote old way of working into this new way, and how does that change strategy, and how do we think about collaboration? And when we introduce AI, we have derivatives that can travel and create personalization and start to bring more teams into a common market presence versus like, can I create a video? And I don't even create videos, because through a tool. So do you see the future as finding partners that also can help with technology, but can come in and help you drive that change? Or do you think organizations have the skill to kind of make that change on their own?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the organization. It's a lame question, or lame answer. But I would say the vast majority of enterprises, organizations out there do not have the requisite skill to effectively plot an AI strategy on their own. Just a fact. Now, doesn't mean they have to hire McKinsey or BCG or Alex Partners to come in, nor does it mean they have to go hire necessarily a smaller consulting shop, but it does, again, necessitate them to recognize the fact that they are not experts in technology in many cases and not experts in AI. And so that's the first thing I say is you have to kind of orient yourself as to where you're at in that technical proficiency or strategic kind of competence around plotting an AI initiative. So if you do end up in that camp of, we make shower curtain rings and we do it very, very well. And but that's not, so we don't understand necessarily how we deploy AI to supply chain, rather than just going and getting a vendor demo and hoping to God it works. Like that's when you really do need to come to things like HumanX, for example, or go to some of the great sites that are out there in the world. Aren't that many, unfortunately, where there's a community of people that are like you, and you can have those conversations. That's really why we made this an event as well as a community, because there's so much content in the world out there today, as we'll discuss later, I'm sure. That isn't the problem. You can go see the talks at HumanX probably at some point anywhere else online in a few months. But really, people have told us over and over again what they need is that connection to other people who are like them, who are in their industries, who've tried and failed, who've tried and succeeded, find the vendors that make sense, talk to those vendors, hear the case studies, talk to the customer at the event, like literally have that connection. And that's why that's why physical events, as much as people kind of poo-poo them in the age of digital meetings and everything else, are becoming very important to the space, because to your point, you do need help most likely. And unless you're really wealthy as a company and can afford a large management consultant or hire an internal team, which very few folks are going to be able to do, you need support. And that support doesn't come from reading, blogs online.
Your HumanX agenda, as we think about, crossing this chasm or this gap that's opened up. One part of it reads like a sci-fi novel or a video. I'm like, oh my God. Like on the main stage, I was reading about Drew Houston, who's the co-founder and CEO of Dropbox. And I will read this word for word. Preparing for a world where machines might outsmart us. If AI surpasses human intelligence by 2026, what does knowledge work look like over the next 20 years? And I was like, dude, 2026 is next year, Yeah. What are, as we think about community and learning, like, what do you think some of the most important things that you've put into the event are, as people think about upskilling or kind of reverting back to like, hey, can I be inquisitive? These are some foundational things that I need to learn and hear and internalize. Like, what are some of the things you're most excited about with the sessions?
Well, we took a very thematic approach to it by, again, doing the research with Harris and getting that data and then figuring out what are the problems people have. Most events, as you probably know, they're programmed based on who they can get to come speak. And we were just really fortunate to be able to really know everyone in the industry and figure out the agenda, then ask them to come speak. So it worked out well. But like the themes that we really anchored on that resonated across a lot of the companies with whom we spoke and surveyed were six. I'll be brief. But basically, one is what I call the October surprise. So how do you stay current when two kids in a garage can upend your entire business strategy, with a couple of servers? The second one is ready, fire, aim, which gets back to our point around planning and not just deploying early. The third is AI as a catalyst for industry transformation, meaning it's okay. Some people look at this and go, I'm in finance. Why would I listen to a healthcare leader about how she deployed their AI strategy? Well, what we're seeing in many cases is that you can learn a lot from cross-industry collabs in these spaces. So that's a big one as well. How do you create that cross-industry collaboration and knowledge sharing? Fourth is workplace transformation. So from the tippy top, from executives all the way down to the new hire, as Drew said, the likelihood that we'll be doing the same work in 2 years as we are today, I think, is practically nil. Fifth, my marketing team hated this one, but I still like it. I think it was let's not get sued or do something stupid. Okay. So that was basically like, how do you think about, you see why I hated that one. I thought it was funny when I wrote it. It was very late. But that's just like policy and how do you make sure you're compliant and all the stuff you deal with in regs and everything else. And the last one is putting a Yugo motor in a Ferrari, which I realize that people of a certain age have no idea what a Yugo is, but if you're old, you remember the Yugo back in the day. And so the thing there really is if you aren't serious about getting your data in the right place and the infrastructure in the right place, deploying AI is just going to put a Yugo motor in a Ferrari. It's not going to deliver on. It might look sexy, but it's not going to go very fast. So those are kind of the 6 themes that we put together. And then all the sessions kind of map into one of those, sometimes broadly, but they map into those themes as a way to help people orient themselves to what we're trying to get out there.
And speaking of helping people orient themselves, as we think of leaders, particularly in marketing, who, that's a majority of the folks that listen to this podcast, what do you think the marketing leader of the future looks like? You mentioned, that us doing the same work in a year or two is practically nil. The skills are different. There needs to be a measure of curiosity. I would imagine there's some reinvention that needs to take place personally and professionally, and how what your team structure looks like, all the 6 things you kind of rattled off. How as a leader do you internalize those things, and what will you look like in the future if you do?
Well, as a marketing leader, and I'm not a marketing leader. I have been in charge of marketing. No one understands why or how that happened, but I'm not a marketing leader.
I don't know, man. Those catchphrases were pretty good.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I have better ideas around. I don't know. We don't really know what's going to happen in a year. I mean, we could end up with agentic AI by the end of the year, which does most of the tasks that we do. I use it today. I mean, I use it. I'm sure you do too. I'm sure a lot of your audience does. I'd probably use some AI tool every 10 minutes of some sort. I mean, at least. I mean, something. So many tools I use. It just depends on what the day is, but. I think from a leader perspective, what are you going to have to do first, as a marketer in particular? I think you got to. We have AI fatigue right now already. We have AI fatigue. There's an article that posted a study done, in January of this year, that found that 40% of all Facebook posts today were being generated by AI.
40%.
That's up 40. That's up from 5% in 2023. So literally 8x, or maybe like an 8x increase basically in a couple year and change. So like as a leader, a marketing leader in particular, how do you actually judo that, right? So how do you say, like, what does it mean? Well, it means instead of mass producing blog posts, find one killer insight that might matter. Instead of doing a crap ton of mails, there's a bunch of interesting companies now which are looking at when and how to target a particular prospect with the right message at the right time. And there's really crazy tools I'm seeing out there that do some of this stuff. Or even things like, counterintuitively, you have a chatbot, but then route to a human quickly if things start to go off the rails. And so I think my point is that you have to you cannot follow the herd here. And that's what I'm seeing so many companies do. It's easy. And that's what you have been trained to do in some cases. Like everyone wants to be, first to be second. Second to be first, one of those two. Basically, they want to see somebody go first, and then they want to be the first, first to be second, basically, right? It's been de-risked, basically. And so I think I see a lot of that out there. And so as a marketing leader, that's important. I think the same thing with like your creative team. I think we're seeing some brands firing wholesale creative teams or really forcing them to work like prompt engineers, and neither works. Like you have to, and this I think applies to even more than marketing. You have to treat these creatives almost like AI conductors, and they're the ones they're editing, they're using it as an idea multiplier, they're doing testing, creative testing. There's an interesting, fascinating company called Aru, AARU, that in essence allows you to run message testing, image testing, whatever else across 350 digital twins of every man, woman, and child in the US. So you can literally say like which of these messages are better messages, and they can, with insanely good accuracy, tell you the answer. And so like things like that where you're able to leverage, so get out of like, I guess my point is for creative professionals and for marketing managers in general, like stop thinking about AI as content gen, because that's what everyone else is doing. Think about using the adjacencies and the opportunities that it opens versus just hitting it head on with more kick-ass images and more blog posts and make our CEO sound smart, which is a losing proposition in most cases. But yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I think is marketers, like the main thing that you're trying to do is stand out, have something unique and different to say, and bring that to market. AI as a kind of normalizer doesn't really do that. It doesn't create any new ideas. It brings you right to the mean, which is typically the most boring place to live and is not going to be insightful. I love what you had to say there. And for us, we started to look at what are all the ways that you can get to a creative idea. Can we have a sort of baseline of research instantly? Can we start to look at, can we transform, we spend all this time creating that killer idea. Now, can we bring it to market differently? Can we adjust it for different personas? And then to your point, can we test how that's going to land even, before we send it? And do we know when to send it? So, starting to think about how do we wrap that really smart, important idea with technology to help, really get to make it better and sharper, but then bring it to market faster and more effectively. So I think from our standpoint, we totally agree. And, when we went down this journey, it was that sort of pre-AI time as well. So we were looking and saying, God, it feels borderline irresponsible to like spend so much time creating like a blog post, and you're like, man, it's not going to do anything. Like one of anything doesn't do anything as far as shaping a market position. You have to start, really showing up consistently and creating relevance. And as marketers, we talked about personalization, like speaking of events, like how many times have we been up on stage and be like, yeah, like personalize the right message at the right time.
Just around the corner for the last 20 years, mass customization.
It's wild, but it's interesting now if we can harness technology to start to adapt our market presence, but you can't offload your market presence. And, what is a key idea? What makes you unique and different? What do you have to say? It's really interesting in order to do that. Speaking of that, when you look at behaviors, we talked about not being boring, not wholesale content gen, not following the herd. Are there any other behaviors that really need to change in business and marketing, or perceptions? Like what are the sacred cows that probably shouldn't be there?
I don't know. I mean, it's certainly when I was back in the marketing division, we were so enraptured with ethnographic studies to figure out your personas against which you market, build product and market product, and I'm sure it did provide value for sure. And I think it's one of those crutches that creatives and marketers kind of lean on. It's like, well, now I've got this data, and Jim, the 43-year-old father of two in Cleveland, and you have the whole thing and backstory, and he went to Case and he flunked, I mean, whatever, all the crazy shit, had an affair, the whole thing.
I think they'd call him like Jam and Jim because he has a garage band too.
100% be Jam and Jim. Yeah, midlife crisis. He's got a Corvette in the front yard. Like it's all sorts of fun stuff. So like that to me, while it was effective, also was a crutch. And I think that's like relying on so many old school ways. And that same problem with, so that's one thing I think is like before you even get into your creative ideation and briefs and marketing, like how do you really use AI differently to help drive data driven, fundamentally insightful analyses that can shape a message, to your point, to make it resonant for the company that you're marketing. There's a company we looked at called Herbie, Herbie, I think. Ask Herbie, I think is what it's called. But Ask Herbie, you literally send it an email and you say, hey, Herbie, I need you to generate a report about the rising prices of wheat over the past 20 years, the reasons why that's happened, what can be done to fix it, yada, yada, yada. Like, give it that's just crazy brief, right? And then 10 minutes later, you get back this definitely third, fourth year investment banker analyst quality piece of work that has all that information inside of it with sources and sites. So you can imagine as a marketer, when you're being faced with marketing either something net new in a category or even an enhancement to something that's already competitive in the category, being able to leverage that type of desktop research, which would take you weeks, if not months, as a non-research expert, is pretty powerful. So I think that's really exciting for me to see as examples. And then to get to your question, like what are the sacred cows, like focusing on those kind of gross ethno type of the kind of gross research studies, leveraging AI to actually do what it does best, which is analyze massive data at scale in a way humans can't do. So that's something that's always be better than we will at forever, which is analyzing and finding patterns in data. Humans are not good at that. We have like memory can hold 7 things at a time, and beyond that, unless you're some special weird person, you're screwed. So that's one of them. The other thing I'd say is just around, I think you're finally getting to the point where we can stop pretending like you can't measure marketing effectiveness. I don't know how many times over the years, whether it's PR or marketing in general, it's like, well, how do you measure ROI of PR? You have to look at your message pull through and how many hits you got and tone of voice, and you put it all together and give it a number, and and it's like, that's bullshit. Or in marketing, it's like, how do you, unless you have direct attribution, how do you tie back, to those things? And again, because the ability of AI, and we're seeing a few solutions starting to pop up now, nothing super mature yet, but a few solutions that will, again, look at the totality of kind of the human experience, if you will, something a little grandiose, but be able to give it, like, here's my campaign, here's what I've done, here's what we put in market. You tell me what the result of that was, and then let it actually comb through the in this case, trillions of data points and signals from across the planet. That's going to be, I think our ability to measure marketing effectiveness will be enhanced through those tools. So I'm bullish on those.
Yeah, I mean, I think the research side has been incredible. We would do that manually over and over and over and over and over again, and it can take weeks or more to like get to specific behavior patterns. You're limited by the number of data sources you have access to, and now, like getting to a baseline of information about a company, competitors, their personas, like the speed at which you can get there, and then you can understand conversations that are taking place. Can I correlate the agenda at this event versus these 3 others, and what are the common themes, and how does that lean into where I'm trying to lead the conversation? So like all of a sudden this rich data set about people is a baseline. Now how do we layer on top of that, right? Like, so as really smart professionals, like becoming customer obsessed and really saying like, cool, but that Jam and Jim is a pretty broad persona. That isn't how people move through the real world, right? So, if we're thinking of even like the persona of a CFO, well, that also is kind of bullshit because there's 57 flavors, right? There's the enterprise, there's the startup, there's growth minded versus efficiency minded, and what they're going to respond to.
None of them are ever fun. That's one thing we can say is common across. No, I'm kidding. I'm my CFO friends, but yes, there's all. No, I met one who was fun once. She was, but yeah, that was it. Yeah, that's right though. That's right. That persona as a generally doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. But you hit at the research angle, which is now like understanding a conversation instantly as possible. What you do with it and how you apply insight is what's really
Yeah,
interesting, right?
that's
So
human. That's the human piece. Yeah.
yeah. So that's, as we're starting to like look at these sort of radical changes, like how people get information is also changing. I know you You spent many years from a search standpoint at Bing and helping bring that to scale. Now the search landscape is really curious, right? So you had, Google dominating for a while. Now Bing is cool
I
again,
know.
maybe
You're welcome,
pretty
Arnold. You're
awesome, right?
welcome. You're
Yeah, yeah,
welcome.
you're
Yeah.
you're always ahead of your time. But then you have AI search through a number of different platforms, and like if you're thinking of AI search as like Google search generated answers, it's kind of like you're missing the point because there's search behavior is changing, right? Like how information is aggregated and platforms and things like that. So as a marketer, like how do you understand and make sense of the world when you've used that as a connection point to audience at scale, at least organically?
I'm sure someone smarter than me will figure out how to monetize this new search paradigm more effectively. But I think about a couple of scenarios yesterday that I had that I would wonder how you would monetize it in a way that would make sense. So we were trying to cook some Szechuan food last night because I love Szechuan food, and so the recipe called for Chongqing vinegar, and I had all these vinegars in my cupboard, and they're all different Chinese vinegars or Asian vinegars, they're all Chinese actually. And I'm like, I don't read Chinese, and so and I don't know why I bought them. I don't know what they are, how old they are. I'm like, oh, these are. So I took my phone and took them to open them. In this case, it was ChatGPT, and took a multimodal image and said, okay, is this Chongqing vinegar? And I would say, nope, not this is what it is. Is this Chongqing vinegar? Nope. How about this one? Nope. This one? Nope. Like, which one of these is most like Chongqing vinegar? And it says, oh, this one's most like Chongqing vinegar. Oh, great. So that's a search. That wasn't the difference there was like I had an endpoint in mind. I wanted to know which vinegar I choose for my recipe, but I wasn't asking for hours of my local CVS. So there's not necessarily a right answer there, right? And so that's an example of like a multimodal search. Same thing with my Meta sunglasses that I wear, and I am the asshole that's talking to myself walking around. That's me. I also had Google Glass back in the day, just to be clear. That's in my.
You're all in
and
on the specs. You're
I
the one that
wore
they
I
were
wear
marketing. Yeah.
I wear prescription glasses, and so I literally had to have my Google Glass. I had to have them put in lenses, and so my daughter told me at one point, we were actually, you can't wear that outside anymore. It's just embarrassing, Dad, for all of us. But my point is, like, that's a search behavior. You're literally searching using this and talking to it and asking questions. That's just it is breaking keyword search. It's breaking the ability for us to get in front of people. If you're, especially in these closed ecosystems, do I think ChatGPT or OpenAI at some point could create an advertising model? Sure, of course they could. They have incredible amounts of information about me because I use it all the time, and other tools too, the Perplexity and Cohere and everything else. So they have a way richer view of me than Google does in most cases, unless I'm all in the Google ecosystem and they're mining my emails. Just kidding, they don't do that. Sorry, my friends at Google, please don't hate me. And so much richer profile of me. And so that's where I don't know. I don't know how marketers are going to position themselves for that. Because I think that spot, sure, navigational queries, transactional queries that are informational in nature. Yeah, those you can still market the hell out of those things. Keyword search is still super effective in almost every situation for those types of things. But as we see behavior shifting to multimodal and other applications that are not contained within the large search ecosystem that we have today, I don't know what to do. I think it's a whole different world.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point of the style of search and how we're seeking information differently, right? Like in the past with Google, you'd be searching for what is that piece of information I need? What is the right answer? A specific data point or things like that. But now it's almost, there's an exploration concept where it's like, hey, I'm trying to, think about this one thing, like help me understand it. And then what next? And it's this like sort of sequential movement through the world that is different, right? Like that's a different behavior, and it wasn't possible through Google search. Arguably it still isn't if you're, just popping up like an answer versus some of these others where you're iterating on a question after question after question. So I think, for us, what's interesting, and I started looking at this too. I'm like, okay, well, whether it's GPT or Perplexity, like they're sourcing different types of information. So even looking at things like, as they've connected to the internet and gotten more current, like things like press releases all of a sudden are being brought up. So if I'm like, hey, what's the latest from HumanX, and they're going to search, they're going to look for recency, they're going to look for product information, agendas, all of that. So part of your content strategy starts to change in this more discovery based world, right? So how am I going to show up? Is my information accurate? Have I stayed current? So
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Just even like, remember how we all in the old days used press releases? Then we're like, I can't have business. You know, when it didn't matter anymore, right? But now you're right, because and the reason that it matters because A, people flooded the zone, and B, search works by at the simplest level, basically counting number of backlinks on a given word to a document, right? So if it's a brand new release, unless you have like a super fresh index, which we used in news, generally you're still reliant on that old bathtub model that Larry and Sergey pioneered so many years ago. And you're right. I hadn't thought about this till just now. The beauty of like a press release these days, written correctly, doesn't the Perplexity or OpenAI or any of these things, Claude, they aren't reliant on backlinks. They can actually understand the things that were written and pull back information that otherwise likely wouldn't have been referenced because it wasn't, it didn't have an authority rank high enough to rank the top 10 blue links. That's a very interesting insight. I hadn't thought about that. So I guess the answer is more press releases. There you go. You're welcome.
That's it. Yeah. Content marketing 2025 is
all
just
press releases, desk side interviews. We're gonna do some product demos. Yeah, it's gonna be great. I mean, we're all in.
Yeah. It is interesting now. Like, and I was looking at, I'm like, at what was showing up and what's not, and is information current? And I was even doing that on our own company, and I was like, oh man, like, why is it referencing us in a way that's 3 months old? And I'm like, well, because we haven't kept up by almost like feeding the web with modern information as quickly as we should. So starting to think about presenting yourself in the world consistently, not only so your customers can find you, but also so you're presented, through all these engines in the right.
Yeah, it's a cool insight. I hadn't thought about that at all. It's a cool insight.
Well, thanks. I'm going to trademark that one.
Sure. Yeah.
And now, as we're talking about search. There's also this sort of arms race, and the LLMs, arguably, get commoditized, and then they jump forward, and then all of a sudden they're commoditized and they jump forward again. So like, what are you seeing? Like, how is this shaking out, at least in 2025, between all these different LLM providers and I don't know if agentic, you want to kind of go down that path, but like, what are the sort of bold insights on where this goes for the remainder of at least this year, if you can look that far?
Well, I think you saw OpenAI dropped something a couple of days ago. It was a Monday, which was, I don't recall the exact feature name. Kevin Weil was coming to HumanX, sure knows it because he's a product person. But in essence, it's like research, something like that, basically, right? And you kind of give it you can't use it unless you're paying the $200 a month, which tells you how complex this thing is because it requires that much compute to do. But the ability for it to do just what I described with Herbie, I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes at Herbie. I have no clue how it works, but similar kind of thing. That's a big shift, like literally. And we've seen kind of agentic approaches for the last couple of years, which are really terrible. Like you say, hey, I need to go build a blog. I need to go build a blog with 10,000 subscribers in a month. How do I do it? And it kind of spins through. And then all it's doing is just literally putting words together based on a mathematical algorithm to say, you should do this, and this, and this. There's no actual relation to the work. And now we're seeing that come to life in a very interesting way, because whether it's Herbie or OpenAI, I'm sure, Claude has a certain version of this as well. And we're seeing other ones pop up. That's pretty exciting. So I think we're going to see more of that. And I think that's only going to accelerate the shift of a lot of the work that we do today that we think is unique to humans being taken on more effectively by these systems. That's pretty exciting. But then really, to me, I think the biggest advances that I'm excited about are not so much consumer facing. They're in medicine. They're in basically hospitals, period. They're mental health. That's where, talk about a totally inefficient system. It keeps people alive. That's their job, but it's not done efficiently. We almost spend a metric shit ton of cash in the US on healthcare. I think it's only behind defense. It's one of our biggest spends. And our outcomes aren't that good in most cases. And so we're seeing some really great AI as a company called HDAI. I'm on the board of, actually. And they have figured out 20 years of longitudinal data of all Medicare data. And they built digital twins for every person in the hospital. And so they're able to say now with really high accuracy Like this person is likely to be readmitted in the next 30 days unless you put them in a skilled nursing facility. That's just, I was telling the team a couple days ago, I was walking through the product with them. So it's actually effing magic. Imagine the power now a care provider has, whether it's a nurse or a doctor or even a parent or a son, for them to have that level of insight into something which, again, we would never be able to do as humans because there's simply too many data points that have to go into that simple recommendation or simple piece of data. And so I think that's where I get really excited is I think I read Dario's post from, I think it was in December, the embrace of loving machines. I think I butchered that, but it's a great essay. Everyone should go read. It's an easy read. That's super technical to read it. But that's what he was kind of going after too. Like LLMs are awesome. It'll be great for marketing. We'll all live in a world full of as many images as we can generate, and press releases out the door from now on. That's our strategy. But where I'm excited really for AI in 2025 is to be able to show some of those breakthroughs and demonstrate the impact. Like I truly believe companies like HCAI will end up saving millions of lives or making end of life better for people. That's nothing else I've ever seen in technology can really has ever done that. I mean, that's not true, but it's a big shift.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting there is folks in our age demographic that are caring for aging parents, population. Like, there's hard decisions, and you have literally zero data points, right? So, because a lot of us have never gone through before, right? So now you're like Googling, it's kind of a crappy experience. And then you're like, man, what do I do? How do I support this person at this moment? So, having insight into proclivity for, what the next 3, 6, 12 months looks like, it makes all those decisions way easier. So it's really interesting. And it comes back to giving us agency by giving us data, insights, fidelity, clarity on what's going on so that we can, make smart decisions and add on top of that. And I think as we're thinking of that in marketing, where can we apply that? And how do we use that to make our lives better, our customers' lives better, our jobs better? Not, do I just look at this to replace what I'm doing or replace, X amount of people? It's how do I, to get back to our earlier conversation, how do I leverage this to be a growth engine and start turning the corner and start moving from uncertainty to clarity, right? Like, I know how to do this. I know what our position should be. And now I get to go execute. And how cool is that? And I think from our standpoint, at least in content marketing, we spent the last probably 5 years, everybody has underwater because there's more demand than there could, at any point, there could never be enough supply, right? And because of that, all of our efforts got distributed. So you have all these teams creating individual stuff, and you're just like, oh my God, like this is, yeah, kill me. And our job is to have a cohesive, coherent market position, and we just can't do it because we don't have enough time or energy. There's not enough hands to do the work, right? So it's really interesting to streamline that and then lean into teams to be able to, focus on what's most important and kind of get back to the roots, which is like, how do I bring a unique insight? How do I have something to say? Why is what I do even valuable? And even to your point, thinking of HDAI or others where it's like, what's our role in the world and how do we make this place better? And how can really smart people use data and insights to kind of step on top versus struggling to get to baseline, which is where a lot of us have been for many, many years. So this is, helps us get ahead. I guess as we wrap here, one, thank you. This has been amazing. But what can you give us an overview of what people can expect at HumanX? What is the size of the event? Maybe some of the speakers that you've alluded to, and where can they go get tickets?
Well, yeah, humanx.co. That's the easiest way to go find us. Just human_x.co. That's a place to register. Do it quickly. Prices go up in a week because that's what happens when you have to do things in Vegas. They get more expensive the closer you get. What can you expect? Well, about 3,500 people, mostly business leaders of some sort. So not a lot of like junior PMs there, mostly people who are leading some kind of strategy or board level discussion around AI. Got 303 speakers from all the companies we talked about today. So, the CPO of Anthropic, of OpenAI, got Alfred Lin, the #1 investor in the world, according to Forbes. Khosla and May Habib from Writer, because it goes on and on and on. So basically any company that you probably have heard about in the news in the last year in AI, their CEO, founder, or very senior executive speaking at the event. So that's one thing. There's great connection opportunities. We have different programs where you can find a vendor trying to sell something that you need, or if you're a venture-backed company, you want to find more dollars, there's a venture backing program we have there, pitch competitions, $1 million prize from Tim Draper. And then what I love so much about this, in addition to all that time to connect and actually find people that can be helpful to you, which is, again, the reason people come to events, is something that we're doing where we take the best speakers in the world on stage, like Khosla, for example, who's an incredible speaker and futurist and one of the best investors on the planet. And most of them have agreed after their talk on stage to do small workshops and roundtables with attendees. So, like I told my team today, if you're a normie business person, the chance of you being able to get in the room with Kevin Weil in your future is, in essence, probably zero, right? And the ability for you to have those conversations, get insight in a smaller group like that versus just being talked at for 3 days, that's a big difference that we have there. So, and if you're a marketer, we still have a few open spots on the floor. If you want to take your company to HumanX, give me a shout. We'll have people there who can buy your product and you can position yourselves effectively. So that's what I would say.
Amazing. Well, Stefan, thank you so much. I learned a lot. Awesome discussion. We appreciate you and best of luck. It sounds like it's going to be an awesome event coming up in March.
I hope so. From your lips to God's ears. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Content Disrupted, brought to you by Skyward. To stay up to date on the latest ideas and insights in brand building and content marketing, visit our website at skyward.com. That's skyword.com. Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to challenge marketing norms and inspire you with fresh strategies for growing business through brand storytelling.